I'm going to start with the starting point of my investigation on Malagueria, and then I'll go through the drawings I've selected. It's quite some drawings, but I think it's trying to demonstrate how many drawings Malagueria has in Niels' in the Drawing Matters collection. This is just a small portion. I was investigating the one part of the Malagueria, or trying to see a very well-known Caesar project by a new perspective, by its called conduit or aqueduct. And that was my starting point, because sometimes Caesar calls it conduit, sometimes he calls it an aqueduct. And from that I understood it's still an ambiguous element in the project and also in the architect's mind. So I'll start. In his sketchbooks, Álvaro Siza describes the Portuguese city of Évora as the white city with granite. This poetic connection is immediately recognizable when contrasting the city's dense white urban fabric with the granite monuments of its historic center. The analogy is referenced in this piece of Newtown that constitutes Malagueria housing estate, a project dating from 1977, where white row houses overlap with a strange concrete body that crosses the neighborhood streets. First designated as conduit, this element is later elevated to aqueduct. Malagueria projects the work of Álvaro Siza beyond borders. International critics rediscover the architect of the Casa de Chá de Boa Nova in what some deem to be the last great social housing project. It is analyzed mainly through an urban and typological lens. The conduit is scarcely mentioned, sometimes omitted, or even criticized. Rafael Moneo doesn't understand it, concluding that the project could exist without this element, which he describes as monumental, evident, and rhetorical. That was my starting point. From Rafael Moneo's argument, I wanted to reanalyze this project and look for the conduit's fundamental role in the whole project. And that, from the reanalysis, I've tried to go through the steps of Siza and the project. Évora stands in a high hill in the Alentejo Plains as a well-preserved heritage, city of granite convents, churches and palaces. Enclosed by surrounding historical walls, several ancestral routes radiate into the territory. The first approach of Siza to the site was very particular, because he took an airplane flight over the city, and he was with someone I couldn't identify yet, that took a lot of photographs that show the site of Évora with its surrounding walls and radiating roads, and this space in the middle that will be Malagueria housing estate. And from this, there was some other photographs that are passing by of an important element of Évora, that's the 16th century aqueduct of Água de Prata. That Siza, more or less, he still doesn't assume it's a reference, but more or less accepts it. And it's this first drawing I wanted to show. It's basically a first technical drawing of Malagueria. I don't know if you can see it. So this drawing identifies basically what he saw in his first trip. This is the Évora Historical Center. They're radiating several ancestral routes. The aqueduct of Água de Prata, which is still very notable here. And the two roads, the road to Lisbon and the road, second municipal road. The space in between, and very important, the two water lines, this one and this one, that will basically shape Malagueria's main drawing. And then he identifies the several illegal settlements that were present, like Bairro Santa Maria, Bairro Fontanas, and the former agricultural fields like Quinta da Malagueira, gives the name. Malagueirinha, it's a smaller form of this one, and several others, including the already being built high-density Cruz da Picada, which is the crisscross you see in the photographs. That will form a solution to Malagueria housing estate. That was
What's the illegal settlement?
There were, sorry.
What's the illegal settlements?
There were masonry houses, but they were not considered illegal by the government, and that's part of also after the SAL program, that's more well known. But this was supposed to be a SAL operation, but it changed. It was put on hold, and it's only in '77 that CISA is called to do the project, when they refute this kind of high-density project. And from that, he's in his first sketches, he's thinking about what's the main thing to do in this project. If it's to build the houses or to preserve the water lines. And that's why the water lines will shape the whole project. You can see here, he will do the theoretical approach that Ribertelsch had on building green corridors around the water lines. And this was an important reference because the landscape architect who worked here, João Gomes da Silva, was called because he was a student of Ribertelsch. He was trying to get Ribertelsch, but I don't know why he couldn't. So he took his student and they worked, but later on in the 80s. Although the conduit first appeared in the urban plan, its definition will be developed in the long time of the project. Alvarez Siza seeks intensely, throughout his sketchbooks, multiple hypotheses and variations of what form the conduit should take. The pages covered with sketches, poems, texts, or notes on imagined cities and architectural ideas and possibilities, which we may not find built in Malagueira, but in later projects. So one of the first drawings is this one, and he has the idea of creating this urban ordering axis to define an elevated wall to provide water and light as to serve as a pedestrian path. A few pages later, the line evolves to a collective and electric transport in what I call a futuristic vision of an aerial train connecting to the historical city. The idea of path progresses to a covered passage, and at a particular moment, an elevated street is added in reference to Alison and Peter Smithson Streets in the Air concepts. These are pages from the sketchbooks. They are copies, so you can...
But does he say that? Or did he go to see the reference explicitly?
No.
Oh, right. That's what I was going to ask.
But we went to interview him in February, and I took this book, Urban Structuring by the Smithsons, and he was really interested. Always denying the reference, but he was really interested. The conduit is continuously idealized as a connecting axis and a pedestrian link to the city. It features the possibility of a canopy, a recurrent element in Caesar's architecture, probably a reference to a Greek agora that reminds of Niemeyer's Marquis of Ibirapuera. Another hypothesis has the possibility of becoming a continuous building over a covered passage that recalls Aldo Rossi's Galaratese project, or Évора's 16th century aqueduct. Besides the general idea, special parts are simultaneously developed. The intersection of the two main ducts section in this image, this drawing, will be marked by a particular moment to sign its centrality, an elevated facade that resembles a church facade, a clock tower, or a Hollywood billboard. This Venturian facade opens up a square at its back with an elevated semi-dome. This element will develop to become a refresher piece, a pure form monument in a square like a Roman forum, a space for people to meet and express their collectiveness, visible on Évора's horizon with the cathedral towers and the grain silos. This is the semi-dome that's still unbuilt, and I think he still wants to build it. Introducing another scale, along the project development, a problem emerges. The house repetition, through adapted to topography, could form monotony and thus bring lack of urban character to the neighborhood. A variation element was necessary to offer singularity of public spaces, besides uniting the scattered dwelling clusters. This elevated structure of the conduit would provide dialogue between the homogeneous and continuous urban fabric of individual houses, and collective buildings to define what he calls another scale. The proposal would mean a negotiation and commitment between several utility suppliers. The solution would be worked by CISA and his engineer to reduce costs to essential minimum. It consists on a structure of reinforced cement block porticos in a regular metric with L or U-shaped reinforcements and prefabricated slabs. Its materiality reclaims the analogy of the White City with granite, now on a more brutalist and arte povera version in the use of concrete blocks. Infrastructure is designed with the same care and rigor as an architecture building. Looking into the technical drawings, we find surprising the detail and precision of the cement block's stereotomy and the dignity given to such a common construction material. The conduit becomes thus an architectural element, the aqueduct, that defines Malagueira's public space and this other scale. CISA draws every urban situation generated by the encounter with housing blocks to introduce singularity and complexity to these public spaces. Additionally, in the aqueduct street crossing, he builds small openings in pure geometrical shapes: a circle, a semicircle, a triangle, a square, a diamond, as urban signage. This is the main drawing, actually, big one, where you can see the most part of the conduit or the aqueduct, with the square where the semi-dome should exist or will exist, depends on what you. And you see the urban structuring of every plot of houses. This is the plot 4 by 12 of each house, of the row house. And there's always a second aqueduct element that supplies the several row houses.
To be precise, the aqueduct supplies what? Water?
Water, electricity, communications, gas, and that's it. Only
and the plumbing and all of
sewers are on the streets, yes. So, imagining Malagueira without its aqueduct, as Moneo suggests, would remove the most interesting and crucial piece to understand the project. It is fundamental to understand and read the urban complex, to give cohesion to its various clusters, to the inclusion of a collective sense and the introduction of urban life vitality. The aqueduct materializes Alison and Peter Smithson's pattern for their streets in the air concept of urban structuring, like an infrastructure in the air concept that defines urban morphology. The Passetto in Rome or the Vasarian corridor in Florence could be considered predecessors of Malagueira's aqueduct. Although historical reference in architecture are more common after Robert Venturi's Complexity and Contradiction, CISA's references come from the surrounding context and 20th century architecture. He seeks to create an urban place with all the complexity, vitality, and ambiguity of the city. The aqueduct is the most ambiguous element in Malagueira. Some accept it, some adore it, others reject it completely, but it's impossible to remain indifferent to it. In a new neighborhood, identity poses an important question, mostly in terms of social cohesion. The aqueduct supplies water, light, and communications, and within and without a collective image of belonging to the city. But its lack of program for inhabitants is possibly one of the reasons of its incomprehension. Above all, it constitutes a contemporary monument recalling Lefebvre's statement that the monument offers each member of society the image of their belonging and social face. However, in Malagueira, this monument is not yet consensual. It needs time to show its durability and resilience to achieve timeless beauty. The contrast between the dark, authorial concrete elements and the bright, anonymous white houses may be considered a contradiction. The Malagueira aqueduct is a work of continuous contradictions, like the change of materiality order in the semi-dome central square, or the absence of a continuous linearity from source to a deposit or a fountain. But the most disturbing contradiction is the lack of physical connection of the aqueduct to the historical city. In a recent interview, CISA states, "We are all postmodern. This does not mean that we use pediments, Doric columns, or the color lilac in our buildings. In what can be defined as a characteristic attitude of postmodernism, he uses reference as a design method without using literal analogy of classical history, and uses a conceptual element, the aqueduct, as an invented pre-existence as a design theme. The conduit is elevated to an aqueduct, the invented monument that wishes to produce a city. Thank you.